From the very start of his campaign, Donald Trump vowed to shake things up. He presented himself as an outsider, a businessman who would bring a fresh perspective to the political landscape. His rallies were filled with fervent supporters who believed in his promise to disrupt the status quo. He promised to drain the swamp of Washington, D.C. and overturn the established order. This resonated with many Americans who felt disillusioned by the political elite and the perceived corruption within the government. The slogan, "Drain the Swamp," became a rallying cry for those who wanted to see significant change. Nowhere was this more evident than in his stance on environmental policy, particularly climate change. Trump's approach to environmental issues was a stark departure from previous administrations. He questioned the validity of climate science and expressed skepticism about the human impact on global warming. Trump repeatedly dismissed climate change as a hoax, a stance that deeply troubled scientists, environmentalists, and anyone who, actually cares about the planet. His comments sparked outrage and concern among the scientific community, who feared that years of progress in understanding and combating climate change could be undone. Trump's rhetoric wasn't just talk. His administration took concrete actions that reflected his dismissive attitude towards climate change. Executive orders were signed and policies were enacted that rolled back environmental protections and regulations. It translated into concrete actions that sent shockwaves through the scientific community and beyond. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, was one of the primary targets of these changes. The agency, which had long been at the forefront of environmental protection efforts, found itself under siege. One of his first moves as president was to set his sights on the Environmental Protection Agency, the very agency tasked with protecting our air, water, and land. Budget cuts, staff reductions, and policy reversals became the new norm at the EPA, leading to a significant shift in its mission and capabilities. What followed was a systematic dismantling of environmental regulations and a sidelining of scientific expertise that left many Americans deeply concerned. The rollback of regulations that had been put in place to protect the environment and public health was seen as a step backward by many. This wasn't just about changing policies, it was about changing the very narrative surrounding climate change. The administration sought to reshape public perception by downplaying the severity of climate issues and emphasizing economic growth over environmental sustainability. By silencing scientists and suppressing information, the Trump administration attempted to rewrite the story on climate change, putting short-term economic gains ahead of the long-term health of the planet and its people. Reports were altered, data was withheld, and scientists were discouraged from speaking out. This is the story of how one administration sought to undermine decades of scientific progress and what it means for the future of our environment and our health. The consequences of these actions are far-reaching, affecting not only the current generation, but also future generations who will inherit the planet. The response from the public, especially the younger generation, has been one of activism and advocacy. Movements like the global climate strikes, led by figures such as Greta Thunberg, have brought renewed attention to the urgency of addressing climate change. These young activists are demanding accountability and action from leaders around the world. Despite the setbacks, there is hope. Advances in renewable energy technologies, such as solar and wind power, offer a path forward. Communities and businesses are increasingly investing in sustainable practices, recognizing that protecting the environment is not only a moral imperative, but also an economic opportunity. On the international stage, efforts to combat climate change continue. The Paris Agreement remains a cornerstone of global climate policy, with countries around the world committing to reduce their carbon emissions and work towards a more sustainable future. The collaboration and commitment of the global community are crucial in addressing this existential threat. Education and awareness are also key components in the fight against climate change. Schools, community organizations, and media outlets are playing a vital role in informing the public about the importance of environmental stewardship. By fostering a deeper understanding of the issues, we can inspire collective action and drive meaningful change. Ultimately, the story of climate change is one of collective responsibility. It requires the efforts of individuals, communities, businesses, and governments working together towards a common goal. While the challenges are immense, the potential for positive impact is equally great. By coming together, we can build a more sustainable and resilient future for all. The promise of a healthier planet is within our reach, but it requires a commitment to science, innovation, and collaboration. As we move forward, Let us remember the lessons of the past and strive to create a world where both people and nature can thrive. The future of our environment depends on the actions we take today. The morning of January 20th, 2017, dawned like any other in Washington, D.C. The city was waking up to a new day, with the sun casting a golden hue over the Capitol building, symbolizing a fresh start. But for some, this day was anything but ordinary. For over 1,000 employees at the Environmental Protection Agency, it was a day shrouded in uncertainty and fear. The usual hustle and bustle of the office was replaced with an air of anxiety, as employees walked into the building with heavy hearts and worried minds. They had arrived at work to an unprecedented email, a notice to immediately stop all grants and contracts. This sudden directive was not just a bureaucratic hiccup, it was a seismic shift that left many employees in shock. The email was terse, offering no explanation, only a command that left everyone scrambling for answers. This abrupt order, coming on the very first day of Trump's presidency, sent a chilling message throughout the agency. Conversations that day were filled with confusion and dread as colleagues huddled together, trying to make sense of the new reality. The atmosphere was tense, with an undercurrent of fear that was palpable. The message was clear. Scientific research, especially anything related to climate change, was no longer a priority. Desks that were once cluttered with research papers and data now seemed like relics of a bygone era. Scientists who had dedicated their careers to understanding and combating climate change were left questioning their future. For many EPA employees, this marked the beginning of a long and tumultuous period. The uncertainty was not just about their jobs, but about the very mission they had committed their lives to. The stress was evident on their faces as they continued to work under the shadow of an administration that seemed to undermine their efforts at every turn. The hiring freeze that followed, coupled with proposed budget cuts, created a climate of fear and instability. Desks that were once occupied by passionate and dedicated employees now sat empty, a stark reminder of the agency's uncertain future. The dimly lit offices seemed to echo the somber mood that had settled over the headquarters. It became increasingly clear that the Trump administration was not just looking to reshape the EPA. They were looking to fundamentally dismantle its ability to protect the environment. Meetings were held behind closed doors, decisions were made without transparency, and the agency's mission was being systematically eroded. This sudden shift in direction left many wondering about the future of environmental protection in the United States. Environmental activists took to the streets, their voices filled with concern and determination. Protest signs questioned the future, demanding answers and accountability from an administration that seemed intent on rolling back decades of progress. The EPA, once a global leader in environmental science and policy, was now facing an existential threat from within. The logo on the building, once a symbol of hope and progress, now stood as a silent witness to the agency's struggles. Empty office spaces and scientists leaving the building painted a grim picture of an uncertain future. The question on everyone's mind was clear: what would become of the EPA and its crucial mission to protect the environment? To understand the depth of this attack on science, we must delve into the intricate workings of the Environmental Protection Agency's advisory committees. These committees are the backbone of scientific integrity within the agency, ensuring that policies are based on sound science. The EPA's advisory committees play a crucial role in shaping environmental policies that protect public health and the environment. They provide independent, expert advice to the agency, helping to ensure that regulations are grounded in the best available science. Two committees in particular stand out for their importance: the Science Advisory Board and the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee. These committees are composed of some of the nation's top scientists who volunteer their time and expertise to review the scientific basis of EPA policies. These committees weren't just bureaucratic window dressing, they were the guardians of scientific integrity at the EPA. Their work was essential in ensuring that the agency's decisions were based on the most up-to-date and rigorous scientific evidence. The Science Advisory Board, made up of the nation's top scientists, reviewed the scientific basis of EPA policies. Their job was to ensure that every regulation, every decision, was grounded in the most up-to-date and rigorous scientific evidence. This was no small task, as the board had to sift through vast amounts of scientific data and research to provide their recommendations. Their job was to ensure that every regulation, every decision, was grounded in the most up-to-date and rigorous scientific evidence. This involved reviewing complex scientific studies, analyzing data, and providing recommendations to the EPA on a wide range of issues, from air quality standards to chemical safety. The Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, focusing specifically on air quality, played a similarly vital role in safeguarding public health. This committee was responsible for reviewing the scientific evidence on air pollution and its health effects, and for providing recommendations to the EPA on air quality standards. Trump's administration, however, saw these committees as obstacles. They viewed the rigorous scientific review process as an impediment to their deregulatory agenda. The administration believed that the stringent standards set by these committees were hindering economic growth and burdening industries with costly regulations. They viewed the rigorous scientific review process as an impediment to their deregulatory agenda. To them, the scientific scrutiny and recommendations provided by these committees were seen as barriers to rolling back regulations and promoting industry interests. So they did what any administration threatened by independent expertise would do. They tried to silence them. By undermining the committee's work, the administration sought to weaken the scientific foundation of EPA policies and make it easier to implement their deregulatory agenda. By stacking these committees with industry representatives and downplaying the role of academic scientists, the Trump administration sought to undermine their credibility and effectiveness. This move was seen as an attempt to shift the balance of power away from independent scientific experts and towards industry interests. The Trump administration sought to undermine their credibility and effectiveness. This wasn't just about ignoring scientific advice. It was about actively suppressing it. By sidelining independent scientists and elevating industry voices, the administration aimed to create a regulatory environment more favorable to business interests. This wasn't just about ignoring scientific advice, it was about actively suppressing it. The administration's actions sent a chilling message to the scientific community that their expertise and evidence were not valued, and that political and economic considerations would take precedence over scientific integrity. The assault on science wasn't confined to the halls of the EPA. It extended to the digital realm as well. In a move that can only be described as Orwellian, the Trump administration systematically removed mentions of climate change from government websites. Websites that once provided vital information about the causes and consequences of climate change were scrubbed clean, leaving the public in the dark. The EPA's website, once a treasure trove of climate data and research, became a shell of its former self. This wasn't just an aesthetic change, it was a deliberate attempt to control the narrative and suppress information. By making it harder for the public to access accurate information about climate change, the administration was hoping to sow doubt and confusion, making it easier to push through their anti-environmental agenda. This digital cover-up was a stark reminder that the assault on science wasn't just about silencing scientists. It was about silencing the